I don't know who I am. But I know I don't want to live like this. I don't remember the exact moment it began. There was no specific day. No morning where I woke up and felt everything collapse. The alarm still rang. On time. I turned it off, out of habit. Stayed in bed for a few more minutes. Then got up, half awake, half asleep. No thoughts. No questions. I went into the bathroom. Washed my face. Glanced at the mirror. Then turned away. As if there was no reason to stay. There was no incident. No betrayal. No one left. My job was still there. The income was decent. My family was fine. Everything was acceptable. Acceptable enough that I felt I had no right to complain. I replied to messages. Met deadlines. Showed up where I was supposed to be. There was no fall hard enough to wake me up. Only days passing. Quietly. Evenly. So evenly that I couldn't tell today from yesterday. At night, I came home. Sat down. Picked up my phone. Scrolled, not because I wanted to see something, but because I didn't know what else to do. Sometimes I put the phone down. Looked around the room. Then picked it up again. As if silence itself was dangerous. There were no clear warnings. Only a dull sense that I was living on autopilot. I smiled when talking to people. But sometimes, I couldn't remember why I smiled. I nodded during conversations. But I wasn't always listening. I did everything right. Yet nothing felt like mine. Everything worked well enough to keep going. But empty enough to make me tired. Everything was normal. Too normal. Like a wall absorbing water from the inside. No one notices at first. Not even me. I kept living. Working. Laughing. Completing what was expected. If someone looked at my life back then, they would have said, "It's fine. Nothing's wrong." And because nothing was wrong, I didn't know where to begin saying otherwise. At first, the clearest feeling I noticed was exhaustion. But not the kind that comes from working too much. Not the kind that leaves you completely drained. It was a strange kind of tiredness. A tiredness without a clear reason. My days went like this. I woke up in the morning. Got ready. Went to work. Met people. Talked. Had lunch. Worked through the afternoon. Went home in the evening. Scrolled on my phone. Went to sleep. Nothing was wrong. Work kept moving. Tasks were checked off as completed. I arrived on time. I replied to emails. I nodded during meetings. There were no mistakes big enough to be corrected. No problems serious enough to force me to stop. And yet, there was nothing that made me feel alive. Day after day passed like identical copies. I did things out of habit. More than out of desire. There were tasks I performed so fluently that I didn't even have to think. I finished them quickly. Cleanly. Accurately. Then I moved on to the next task. Without the feeling that I had just lived through anything meaningful. I smiled when I was supposed to smile. In conversations, I reacted at the right moments. I knew when to joke. I knew when to stay quiet. I laughed along with other people's stories. Sometimes even before fully understanding them. That smile wasn't fake. But it wasn't deep either. It felt more like a reflex than an emotion. I answered, "I'm fine," effortlessly. Whenever someone asked, "How have you been lately?" Fine. The word came out so quickly that I didn't have time to question whether it was true. And honestly, I didn't want to question it. Fine was the safest answer. It ended the conversation just enough. without inviting anything more. I used it so often that sometimes I started to believe I really was fine. I played my role well. Wherever I was, I knew who I needed to be. I knew how to behave, so I wouldn't cause trouble. I knew what to say to keep everything calm. I fulfilled my responsibilities. Not outstanding. Not out of place. People could rely on me. And I didn't let anyone down. At least, not on the surface. It's just that, every night, when everything is turned off, when the room becomes quiet, when the voices of the day have faded, when the roles I carried from morning to night are finally set down, that's when I begin to feel things more clearly. No one needs a response from me. There is nothing that has to be handled right away. There is no reason left to pretend that I am fine. I lie there in bed. The lights are off, or only a dim glow remains from the bedside lamp. Sometimes I turn toward the wall. Sometimes I lie on my back, staring at the familiar ceiling. The room doesn't change, but the feeling does. It becomes so quiet that I can hear my own breathing. And in that silence, I realize that all day long, I have been moving fast, moving steadily, without truly touching any emotion. In that moment, I sense a hollow space inside me. Something difficult to name. It doesn't rush in. It doesn't make me panic. It simply sits there, quietly, like a pause that was ignored all day, now finally rising to the surface. I don't know what to do with it. I don't know when it began. Maybe it has been there for a long time. During the day, I just never gave it a chance to appear. I try turning over. I pull the blanket a little higher. I close my eyes. But the quieter it gets, the clearer that feeling becomes. It's not sadness that makes me want to cry. It's not exhaustion that leaves me drained. It's an emptiness. One that makes me aware that I am lying there, yet not truly connected to myself. And then, almost by instinct, I reach for my phone. The screen lights up in the dark. Old notifications appear. I scroll. Not because I care, but because I'm used to it. I watch a few short videos. Read a few lines of news. Let the sounds and images fill the empty space that just emerged. The feeling softens. It doesn't disappear. It just moves a little farther away. Far enough that I don't have to face it directly. I tell myself, I'll look for just a little longer. But that little usually lasts longer than I expect. And I've done this many times. Not because I'm addicted to my phone, but because I don't yet know how to stay with that emptiness. Every night passes the same way. I postpone facing my own feelings a little longer, then a little longer still, until sleep finally arrives. And I drift off. The next morning, everything begins again from the start. Fast, steady, and busy enough to keep me from thinking about that empty space once more. It doesn't hurt. There is no specific sadness I can point to. No clear story to tell. No event big enough for me to say that I am suffering. I don't recall a memory that makes my chest tighten. No image suddenly rises up and brings me to tears. I still eat normally. I still sleep. I still laugh when it's expected. There is no clear reason for me to allow myself to be weak. If someone asked, I wouldn't know where to begin. I can't say I'm sad because of something. I can't even say that I'm in pain. Everything is too vague, too faint, to be named. And because I can't name it, I feel even less entitled to make a scene about it. It's not intense sadness. There is no sense of collapse. No sudden breakdowns. No unexpected tears. No nights curled up in despair. It's just a very steady state. Very quiet. Stretching from one day to the next. I still function. I still work. I still live. But it feels like I'm standing slightly off from my own life. It's the feeling of being everywhere, yet not truly in any moment. I hear people speak, but I'm not always listening. I work, but I don't feel fully present in it. I take part in life, but it's as if I'm watching it through a thin layer of glass. It's just a muted feeling. Muted. Like eating a familiar dish and no longer remembering why I liked it in the first place. Muted. Like days passing, and by night, I can't recall anything that truly mattered. Not bad, but not enough to stay with me. Everything happens, then passes, leaving no clear mark behind. It's not loud. It's empty. An emptiness that doesn't make noise, doesn't disturb, doesn't demand attention. It doesn't make me panic. It doesn't push me to change immediately. It simply stays there, quietly, like a long pause. I've never truly stepped into. That emptiness is light enough that others don't notice it. From the outside, I still seem fine. Still normal. Still doing my part. But it's heavy enough that every night, when there's nothing left to do, no one left to talk to, nothing left to cover it up, I realize something deeply uncomfortable. That I lived through the entire day, yet I was not truly present in it. And realizing that doesn't hurt. It only makes the emptiness feel deeper. One night, I lay on my bed. The lights were off. Only a faint glow remained from the phone I had just placed face down beside me. The room was so quiet that I could hear the steady hum of the fan, the distant sound of cars on the street, and my own breathing. I wasn't fully asleep, but I wasn't awake enough to think about anything in particular. I stared at the ceiling. There were a few small cracks there. Ones I had seen many times before, but never really looked at. I thought about the things I had done that day. Nothing went wrong. Nothing stood out. Everything passed neatly, just like the days before. And then, very naturally, without a build-up, without a special reason, a question appeared, as if it had been there for a long time, waiting for me to be quiet enough to hear it. If tomorrow I continue living exactly like today, and then the day after that, and a year from now, what happens? I didn't sit up. I didn't breathe faster. My heart didn't start racing. The question didn't come with fear. It didn't demand an immediate answer. It just stayed there. Quiet. But heavy. I tried to push back against it. In my mind, I listed the reasons to reassure myself. My job was stable. Life wasn't too bad. Nothing major had happened to me. Many people were struggling far more than I was. Logically, I had nothing to complain about. But the more I thought, the harder it became to deny the question. Because I couldn't find a reason honest enough to say that I wanted to keep living this way. Everything was fine. Fine in the sense that nothing was falling apart. Fine in the sense that I could keep going for a while longer. It's just that In that picture, I couldn't see myself. I saw someone doing everything right, fulfilling their role, moving forward. But that person felt more like a version that had been placed there than my real self. I lay there for a long time, doing nothing, not searching for an answer, not trying to push the thought away, just lying there. For the first time in a long day, not running from my own feelings. I began to observe the people around me more closely, not out of curiosity, but in quiet moments, when I sat still and simply watched others live. At work, in cafes, on the bus, in conversations that seemed completely ordinary. Some people felt clear. They spoke about their plans naturally, without the need to show off. When they talked about their work, or what they were moving toward, their voices carried a certainty that was hard to mistake. They might not end up following that path forever, but at least they knew where they were headed. Their eyes didn't drift. They had a place to rest, a direction, something to believe in. Others didn't talk much about goals. They didn't speak of dreams. They didn't use big words. But the way they arranged their lives spoke for them. They gave their time to what they cared about. They declined what didn't fit, without long explanations. Their lives weren't loud, but they had order. As if, quietly, they had decided what to hold on to and what to let go. Watching them, I didn't feel envy. I just felt distance. A very gentle distance. A very quiet one. Like standing at the side of a road, watching people pass by, each carrying their own direction, whether fast or slow. As for me, I always seemed busy. My schedule was rarely empty. I moved from one task to another, from one responsibility to the next. Everything connected so smoothly that I never had time to ask myself why I was here or where I was going. I felt as if I was moving very fast along a road I couldn't remember choosing. Maybe I agreed to follow it at some point long ago, when I believed it was the most reasonable option. And then I simply kept going, because stopping would be inconvenient and difficult to explain. I don't know where I am headed, but I know that I am not standing still. I am moving every day, completing small stages, progressing, in a very technical sense. It's just that, within all that movement, I'm not sure whether I am truly moving toward myself. I used to think the problem was that I wasn't trying hard enough. So I tried harder, in the very familiar way of people who don't know where they're going wrong. I started filling every moment of time. My workdays grew longer. In the evenings, I still opened my laptop, still reviewed what was already done, just to make sure nothing had been missed. I allowed myself very little rest, because rest forced me to face the emptiness I wasn't ready to name. I did more. I took on extra tasks. I volunteered for more responsibility. Not because I enjoyed it, but because I believed that being busy meant moving forward. As long as there was work to do, I didn't have to question its meaning. I learned more. I signed up for new courses, listened to talks, took careful notes. I studied skills. I studied mindset. I studied how to manage myself, how to become better. Every time I started something new, I felt a small sense of hope. As if I learned enough, I would finally find what was missing. I consumed more advice. I saved inspirational quotes. Articles about discipline. About effort. About never giving up. I read them at night. Before sleep. Telling myself that tomorrow I had to do better than today. Those words sounded right. Logical. Convincing. They just didn't touch the place where I was truly tired. I compared myself to others more often. I looked at where they were, what they had achieved, how they were living. I wondered why they seemed clearer than me, why they moved faster, why they appeared less uncertain. I used other people's lives as a measuring stick, then quietly adjusted myself to fit it, without asking whether I truly wanted to be measured that way. I believed that if I were disciplined enough, hardworking enough, persistent enough, that emptiness would disappear. I believed that tiredness was simply a sign that I hadn't tried hard enough yet. That if I just pushed a little more, everything would fall into place. But it didn't. The more I tried, the more exhausted I became. Not because the work was too difficult. Not because I couldn't do it. But because, as each day passed, I still didn't know what I was trying for. I was like someone climbing a very sturdy ladder, each step solid and secure. But I didn't know whether the wall it leaned against was the wall I actually wanted to climb. And that uncertainty, more than the effort itself, was what drained me. One afternoon, I sat alone in my usual cafe. It wasn't a special place. No beautiful view. Just somewhere I often went when I needed to sit, without having to explain myself. The cafe wasn't crowded. There was just enough conversation to keep me from feeling lonely, and not enough noise to demand my attention. I ordered a coffee, as I always did, sat in the corner near the window, opened my laptop, but didn't open anything in particular. The screen was on. My mind was empty. Outside, the afternoon light was fading. The sun slanted across the table, revealing small scratches I had never noticed before. I stared at them for a long time, as if that were the only thing I needed to do. Around me, people were still living their lives. Someone typed constantly, headphones on, their expression tense, but familiar. Two people sat across from each other, speaking softly, laughing from time to time. Someone else drank coffee while scrolling through their phone, their finger moving up and down the screen in the same steady motion I used at night. Everything felt normal. And because everything was so normal, I suddenly realized I no longer had the energy to pretend I was busy. I didn't want to open another file. I didn't want to write another to-do list. I didn't want to tell myself that if I just tried a little harder, everything would be fine. I sat there, my hands resting on the table, feeling a tiredness that wasn't in my body, but somewhere deeper. A place where effort had stopped meaning something. For the first time, I didn't blame myself for being tired. I didn't tell myself that I was weak. I didn't force myself to get up right away. I just sat there and thought, very simply, if I keep trying like this, where am I actually going? The question wasn't harsh. It wasn't accusing. It was just honest. Ordinary. Asked on an afternoon that wasn't special at all. I looked out through the glass window. People passed by. each heading in a different direction. Some walked quickly. Others moved slowly. No one knew what I was thinking. And no one needed to. And in that moment, between the fading smell of coffee and the last light of the afternoon, I understood something small, but important. Maybe the problem wasn't that I hadn't tried hard enough. Maybe the problem was that I had been trying for far too long in a direction I had never truly chosen. That thought didn't bring relief right away, but it made me stop. And for the first time in a very long while, stopping didn't make me feel guilty. I realized something deeply uncomfortable. I can speak fluently about the things society calls success. I know what a good job looks like, what an acceptable income is, what a proper timeline is for each age. I know when it's time to settle down, when it's time to push harder, when someone is considered to be falling behind. In conversations, I'm not awkward at all. When others talk about their plans, I nod. I join in. I offer reasonable comments. I can explain why one choice is safer than another, which path carries less risk, which option will reassure family and the people around me. I know exactly the answers people want to hear. I know how to say, this job is stable. Now is not the time to take risks. This is the safer way. Those sentences come out naturally, as if I've repeated them enough times to believe they are my own thoughts. But if someone turned to me, not in casual conversation, but seriously, directly, and asked, how do you want to live? I would stop. Not because the question is confusing, but because I don't have an answer ready. No clear image appears in my mind. No scene that makes me certain enough to say, that's what I want. All I see are reasonable options, safe choices, paths that many people before me have already confirmed as fine. I can explain very clearly what I should do, but I don't know what I want to do. Not because I don't have dreams, but because for a long time now, I haven't truly stopped to ask myself a question that doesn't serve anyone else. I've grown used to giving answers that reassure others, to the point where I forgot that I, too, am someone who needs to be heard. I realized that I have learned very well how to live reasonably, but I have never learned how to live as myself. I have lived in autopilot mode for quite a long time. Each day followed a familiar sequence. I did what was expected, not because I believed in it, but because that was enough to keep everything running smoothly. I replied to emails properly. I finished my work on time. I showed up where I was supposed to be. I rarely asked myself whether I actually wanted to do those things, because doing things right was enough. Doing what I should do. I chose the most reasonable options available to me. I weighed the pros and cons. I thought about consequences. I thought about how others would see me. I grew used to asking, is this acceptable? More often than, do I want this? Avoiding what might be criticized. I stayed away from decisions that could be seen as reckless or poorly thought out. I was afraid of making people worry. Afraid of having to explain myself. Afraid of being asked questions I didn't yet have answers to. So each time, I pulled myself back a little. Enough to stay unnoticed. Enough to avoid judgment. Choosing what was safe. Safe here didn't mean happiness. It meant causing no trouble. Not disappointing anyone. not making things awkward. I accepted low-risk choices, even when they left me feeling flat. I told myself that emotions could wait, while stability was urgent. I didn't resist, but I didn't choose either. I let things happen, and called it a decision. I followed paths that were already laid out, because turning in another direction would mean taking full responsibility for my own life, and I wasn't ready for that. Then one day, without a climax, without an event, without any warning signs, I understood something very simple. Not in a special moment, just sometime in the middle of very ordinary days. This life isn't wrong. It works. It's fine. It meets the standards I once believed were important. It's just that it doesn't belong to me. Like a suit that fits well, carefully tailored, but carries no trace of the person wearing it. I could live in it for a long time, maybe even my whole life, but I would always feel that I was wearing something chosen for me, not something I chose myself. And realizing this didn't make me want to tear everything down. It simply made me understand that if I continue living this way, I won't be wrong, but slowly I will disappear inside my own life. What surprised me was that I wasn't angry with myself. I didn't blame myself for being weak. I didn't call myself inadequate. I didn't see myself as a failure by any familiar standard. Looking back, I had done quite well at what was expected of me. I hadn't neglected my responsibilities. I hadn't let myself go. I hadn't done anything terribly wrong. It's just that I realized I had lost my way. Not lost from the path of success that people usually talk about. I was still on that path. In fact, I was moving along it rather neatly. I simply realized that I had been walking for so long that I no longer remembered why I started. I drifted away from myself in a very quiet way. There was no single moment of loss, just things slowly disappearing. The things that once caught my attention, the things that once made me curious, the things that once made me want to linger a little longer. I couldn't remember the last time I touched them. I realized that I no longer knew clearly what I cared about. Not because I didn't care about anything, but because I had grown used to setting those feelings aside. I knew very well what needed to be done, but I didn't know what truly made me want to do it. There were things that once excited me, but now, thinking about them only made me tired, or they no longer felt necessary. I wasn't even sure anymore what felt meaningful to me. Days passed, and completing tasks gave me a sense of closure, not fulfillment. I checked things off, but I didn't feel myself moving closer to anything I could call important. Everything was done correctly, but nothing went deep. And when I asked myself what I was living for, I realized how poor my answer was. Not because I lacked ideals, but because the only answer left was to not fall behind. I lived to keep up, to not be slower than others, to not be seen as a failure. But I wasn't living for something that made me want to wake up each morning with clarity. Realizing this didn't make me panic. It just made me sad. In a very quiet way. Sad because I understood that I didn't lose myself in a reckless moment. I lost myself through reasonable choices, repeated over and over, until I could no longer hear my own voice. And perhaps the most regrettable part wasn't that I lost my way, but that I was lost for a very long time, while believing I was on the right path. Someone asked me that question at a very ordinary moment, not in a serious conversation, no philosophical mood, no long, emotional confession. We were just sitting together, talking about random things, when the question was dropped, almost casually, as if it didn't really matter. So, do you know who you are now? I didn't answer right away. I stayed silent for a moment, not because I was overthinking, but because I didn't want to give a random answer, just to move on. I looked down at the glass in front of me. The ice nearly melted, and for the first time, I didn't feel the need to sound certain. I shook my head. No explanation. No joke to lighten the mood. I still didn't know. Saying that out loud didn't embarrass me the way I thought it would. It didn't make me feel inadequate. It was simply a truth, spoken after a long habit of avoiding it. And yet, the moment I said I didn't know, I realized I no longer felt as empty as before. This time, I knew something else, something clearer than any label or definition of myself. I didn't want to keep living like this anymore. Not in the sense that I hated my life. I didn't resent my job. I didn't dislike the people around me. I didn't want to tear everything down and start over. It was simply that I felt I was living too far away from myself. Far in the sense that each day passed smoothly. Yet when I stopped, I couldn't see any trace I had left behind. Far in the sense that I fulfilled many roles, but none of them felt like me. This life isn't terrible. It's fine enough to keep going, but it isn't close enough for me to feel truly present in it. And for the first time, I understood this. Not knowing who I am is less frightening than knowing, very clearly, that I can't keep living the same way anymore. I began to allow myself to not have answers right away. Not through a big decision, but through very small changes. I stopped forcing myself to come up with long-term plans every time I had free time. I no longer felt guilty when an evening passed and I hadn't learned anything new about myself. I accepted that on some days the only thing I could do was simply live through that day. I allowed myself to doubt choices that had once seemed obvious, to doubt even the goals I once believed were mine. When someone told me, just keep pushing and it will work out, I didn't argue. But inside, I stopped treating that as a fact. For the first time, I allowed myself to consider that maybe I was pushing in the wrong direction. Not that I wasn't pushing hard enough. I allowed myself to slow down. Slow in making decisions. Slow in answering questions about the future. Slow even in the rhythm of daily life. I stopped trying to fill every free moment with something that looked useful. There were times when I simply sat still, looking out the window, or walked without music, without searching for content to consume. Slowing down felt uncomfortable at first, but it was also the first time I could hear my own voice a little more clearly. I allowed myself to be uncertain. I stopped pretending That I knew what I was doing. When asked about my next plans, I no longer gave smooth, practiced answers. I said honestly that I wasn't sure. And I was surprised to find that admitting this didn't make everything collapse. The world didn't stop turning just because I didn't have an answer. I stopped forcing myself to find myself quickly, as if it were a problem that needed to be solved on a deadline. I realized I had been treating life like a to-do list, where knowing who I am was an item that had to be checked off before some invisible milestone. But gradually, I understood something very simple. Big questions are not meant for those in a hurry. They need time. They need wrong turns. They need unclear days without conclusions. And for the first time, I allowed myself to believe that not knowing is not a failure, but a necessary state for me to find myself more honestly. Maybe it will take more time. I no longer set deadlines for having everything figured out. I accept that some questions will stay with me for a long time, moving alongside me through different stages of life. There are mornings when I still wake up feeling uncertain, still not knowing where I'm headed. And I no longer treat that as a problem that needs to be solved immediately. Maybe I will take detours. I don't know whether the road ahead will be straight. Maybe I'll try a few directions and return to where I started. Maybe I'll spend time on things that, looking back, will seem unnecessary. But at least those detours will be my choice, not something I take because I'm afraid to stop. Maybe I'll be wrong a few more times. I no longer believe that trying the right way guarantees I won't fail. I understand now that mistakes aren't always avoidable, and that avoiding mistakes by refusing to choose is its own kind of mistake. Thinking this way makes me less afraid and less harsh with myself. But at least, for the first time in a long while, I'm no longer pretending that I'm fine. I don't force myself to sound cheerful in conversations when inside things are tangled. I don't answer, "I'm fine," out of reflex anymore. Sometimes I say I'm tired. Sometimes I say I'm not sure. Sometimes I choose silence. I allow my emotions to exist without editing them to sound better. And strangely enough, that alone already makes me feel a little lighter. Not light in the sense that all problems disappear, but light because I no longer have to tense myself up just to appear okay. I go to sleep without having to convince myself that today was meaningful. I wake up without the feeling that I must immediately run to catch up with something vague. That lightness is small, fragile, but it's real. And I realize that maybe I don't need to find the perfect path right away. Maybe simply living a little more honestly each day, without abandoning myself, is already a way forward. I don't know who I am. I still don't have a clear definition. I don't have a neat answer to describe myself. And maybe I don't need one right now. But there is one thing I know very clearly. I don't want to live a life where every night, when everything is quiet, I have to ask myself, what am I doing to myself? Not out of curiosity, but because the same sense of being lost keeps returning. I've begun to ask myself more questions. Not to find answers right away, but to notice what I might have been overlooking. Am I living very busy days without knowing where I'm actually going? Am I moving forward, but only on autopilot? Am I calling it fine simply because I haven't dared to stop long enough to hear what I truly feel? Am I running just to avoid falling behind instead of moving toward a place I actually want to reach? And if this continues, a year from now, 5 years from now, who will I become? I don't have the answers. But for the first time, I understand that the real journey may not begin with knowing who I am. It begins at the moment you are honest enough to admit that the way you are living, even if it is right, even if it is fine, even if it is reasonable, is no longer close enough to who you are. And maybe that is when you begin to stop. Not to give up, but to look at where you are going and whether you still want to keep walking in that direction.